My dear brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus, the first reading of the day has a beautiful discourse on God. St. Paul is speaking to the people and he is telling them, I will tell you about that God whom you do not know, the unknown God. And you have an altar for him, and I will tell you who this God is in your life. For some of us, God may be an object of worship, and that is what was happening in Athens. They came there precisely to offer, to make puja, and with that it is over. God is an object of worship. What is the place that I have for God in my family, in my life? He is an object of worship. I do offerings, I make puja, and I am satisfied. And St. Paul says, no, he is not that. God is not an obligation. Right from my childhood, I have been taught to go for mass, to say my rosary, to be regular for my spiritual activities. He is an obligation. I am told to do, and I am doing this. God is not an option. I have many options in my life, and God is also an option. Perhaps whenever I am sad, low, whenever I need a blessing, I take this option. Let me go to God. And otherwise, He is not an option that I usually choose. God is not an object of worship. God is not an option. And if God is not an option, if He is not an object, He is not an obligation, who is He? And St. Paul has an answer. He says, in Him we have, and in Him we move and have our being. To put it in simple words, he says, He is our everything, He is our all. In Him we move and have our being. Everything of mine belongs to Him. And that is what was inspiring Paul. And this God he experienced not as an object of worship, not as an obligation, not as an option, but then for Paul, someone was the force of his life. Someone was guiding his life. And he could feel God as everything. And that is why he said, what can separate me from the love of Christ? Nothing can separate me from the love of Christ. And this God he has experienced, now he is proclaiming. Perhaps the Lord is also telling us as elders, this God is someone whom we have to experience this way. In Him I have my moving, I have my being. He is my everything. And that is how we have got to experience. And this God needs to be proclaimed. It needs to be told to our children, to our youngsters, to everyone whom we meet. And what would be the response at times for our proclamation? You take this God and you say, I've experienced this God as the driving force of my life. In Him I move and have my being. What would be the response? Sometimes in our own homes, the response may not be positive. What was the response to St. Paul? And now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked him. Some mocked him. They were bullying him. They were laughing at him. You're speaking about resurrection, about God, and this is our response. And listen, but others said, we will hear you about this sometime later. We are not interested now. Maybe we will see sometime later. It can happen to us when we do it with our own children at times. Maybe sometimes they mock. Every time you speak of Christ, God at home, they're not interested. And sometimes they say, we will speak about it later. Not now. That was the response of the peoples of Athens. With so much of zeal he is speaking, he is explaining to them who this God is, this unknown God. But then for them, God was an object of worship, and Paul was not giving that definition. Paul was not giving a definition of obligation. You have to do this because we have been doing this as a tradition. He said, in Him we move and have our being. He's our everything, and people could not accept it. People could not accept that definition of God. And today the Lord is asking us, am I ready for that definition of God, that in Him I move and have my being? He's my everything. Every step of mine is happening. Everything that is happening in my life is happening because of God. He's not an option, He's not an obligation, He's not an object of worship. And what was the response of Paul to the people of Athens? He simply left them and went to Corinth. He continued preaching. We have the response of the people, we also have the response of Paul. He did not stop. He continued. The first reading ends, after this, he left Athens and went to Corinth and preached the gospel. It is not that we cannot say they are not interested, they don't listen to me, therefore I do not speak anymore about Christ and God in my family. No. I will still speak. Sometimes our voices may be voices in the wilderness, like that of John the Baptizer. You hear a voice in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, and who is going to listen to you in the wilderness? In the wilderness, nobody will listen to us. But then yet, John the Baptizer spoke. At times our voices may be voices in the wilderness, but then we are still called upon to continue our mission, to continue sharing our experience about this God in whom we move and have our being. And we cannot stop that, irrespective of the response that comes to us. Whether people are interested or not interested, whether we are welcomed or not welcomed, they continued their mission. And that is how Jesus also, He was also like that. In spite of the criticisms of the scribes and Pharisees, He would never stop His good work. Today, may the Lord inspire all of us as He inspired, so that we may experience this God as someone in whom I move and live and have my everything. And I experience this God and proclaim this God wherever I go and in whatever I do. As I walk along, I just keep trusting. He gives me a song. Storm clouds darken the sky of the heavenly